This meeting is being recorded.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I am still your host, Dr. B. Happy to have all of you with us today as we talk about how to measure the nation's income through what we call gross domestic product. But before we jump into gross domestic product, I want to quickly call your attention to the classroom, couple very brief announcements, and we'll get started talking about gross domestic product. So, first thing I want to do is call your attention to where we are in the classroom. We are all the way in week 7 now, which means that we've completed the first 6 weeks of this course. And next week, toward the end of next week, week 8, we have the midterm exam coming up. So, end of next week, we're halfway through our course. Yeah. So it goes by so fast. It really does. So what does that mean for you? Some of you have fallen behind in your coursework. I sent out a couple of messages, and what I'd like you to do, if you are behind in your coursework, meaning, oh, you forgot to submit a couple things, I'd like you to still submit those for credit. It's very important that you still submit your work. As I mentioned very early on in this course, the only way to pass this course is to complete all of the coursework. So all of your quizzes, all of your discussion boards, all of your hypothesis, all those things got to be done each week. If you don't do it, it's going to be very difficult for you to pass this course. So my recommendation is to go back over the past few weeks and complete the work that you missed. As long as you do that, there's a good chance you'll pass. Okay? Just do all the work. That's all you got to do. Okay? So please, please, please do the work. Right now, a lot of students are failing the course because they're not doing the work. You don't do the work, you don't pass. It's very simple. Okay? So please do the work. So go back in time, do those quizzes, do those discussion boards and hypothesis, and you'll be okay. Just do the work. So, sorry I had to get on my soapbox, but it's really important because I care a lot about you, I care about your grades, and I want you to pass this course. And again, the only way you can do that is to actually do the work. If you don't do the work and the engage and explore and action expression for each week, you won't be able to pass. So please do all the work. Okay? So that's my soapbox. So if you miss something, go back in time and get it done. So thanks for listening to me on that. I just, again, I care a lot about you and I care about this. I care about your success in this course. So without further ado, let's talk about gross domestic product, also known as the way that we measure the United States income. So in this course, in macroeconomics, we study the entire economy in a global perspective. We look at it more specifically from the country. So in macroeconomics, which is this course, we study it from a economy-wide framework. So I'm looking at everything that happens in the United States. And that includes things like inflation rates, the unemployment rate, and the economic growth rate. These three tools help me to look at the national economy. It tells me how well the economy is doing or not doing. That inflation rate. And you all know what I'm talking about with inflation because we've all been impacted by this over the past couple of years, where the inflation rate has been higher than its usual 2%. Inflation, that's an every year thing. It usually hovers around 2%. Over the past few years, especially this past year, we're talking inflation rates of over 10%. Okay, but now we've gotten it kind of under control. So by the end of this year, we're right at 2%. We're doing well. And so in order to, help the economy out as things slow down, the Federal Reserve cuts the interest rates to help to stabilize the growth. Okay? So that's inflation. That's the way we measure inflation. Inflation is a key indicator of how well the economy is doing on a national perspective. Another rate that we look at from a national perspective is the unemployment rate. This is a measure of the number of people that are currently not working that are willing and eligible to work. Okay, so what I mean by that is in the unemployment rate, we look at people that are in the workforce that are currently not working. Okay, for whatever reason. They're looking for new work because of X, Y, and Z. Maybe they got laid off from their job, or they or something happened to their job, right? And so they're no longer working, but they're actively looking for work. Those people are considered unemployed. Okay, and so we look at the percentage of the people who are unemployed in this country to understand the overall health of our economy. Right now, the United States is sitting at a pretty 4.2% as of today, which is September 30, 2024. 4.2% is a great number. When it around 4%, that's a really healthy unemployment percentage. In previous years, before the baby boomer generation started retiring, unemployment was significantly higher, 9, 10%. Okay, that used to be the norm. The normal used to be about 8, 9% unemployment. That was normal, just maybe 4 years ago. But now, because today we have a lot more jobs available, we don't have enough people to fill them, and the older generations are retiring. So it's leaving a big gap. And when you consider that, the unemployment rate goes down. So now I have a lot of job openings, not enough people to fill it. My unemployment rate right now is about 4.2% as of today. And that's really great. That's amazing. If you look at historical numbers, that's really good. What I think will happen in the future is that unemployment number will keep going down, and it'll probably be real steady around 3%, which is phenomenal. But at the same time, it tells us a little bit more about the economy. There's a lot of open jobs. So that's unemployment. That's another measure that we look at from a national perspective. And another tool that we look at is called economic growth, or what we call gross domestic product. Gross domestic product helps us to measure the country's wealth and growth. And it also tells us a lot about how things are looking in terms of our production, from manufacturing, from service, how efficient our markets are. The more efficient the marketplace, the more stable the economic growth is. We look at gross domestic product as a measure of stability in this country. Anything above 3% gross domestic product is considered good. Okay, 3% and above is considered good. What's it right now, you might be wondering? That's a good question. I'm not too sure. But last I knew, the gross domestic product was, I think, hovering around 3%. So higher than that is really good. So gross domestic product, on average, it should be somewhere between 6 and 8%. Are we there right now? No, but it's stable and it's positive. It's a positive number, so that's good. You always want gross domestic product to be positive. That's what I'm trying to get at. So that's macroeconomics. That's a study of what we're going through in this course. Some of you may have already taken microeconomics, which is Econ 202. If you've taken that already, great. If you haven't taken that course yet, you might want to consider taking it probably in the spring. And macroeconomics focuses on the individual households and companies and how they make decisions and interact with the marketplaces. So the word macro means big, right? The macro, the big scale, okay? Think the country is macro. Micro, as the name implies, micro means minute, small. Micro, we examine individual markets, individual companies, individual households. That's Econ 202. So if you haven't taken that course already, that's what that course is about. This course, Econ 201, focuses on the macro. So as I had mentioned a few times, gross domestic product, the idea is that we're using this as a tool to measure the total income of everyone in the economy, which in turn tells us the overall health of the economy. Okay, it also measures the total expenditure on the economy's output of goods and services. Think about it this way from a business perspective. The income being generated comes from sales of goods and services, and it comes from the overall productivity of the economy. Okay, that's where the income comes into play. The expenses or outflow from the economy is from government spending on goods and services, like infrastructure, education, police, fire, other infrastructure, and government services. Those are all expenses, right? So the government receives revenue from the taxpayers based off of the generated goods and services, right? And the expenses going out for the government are things like infrastructure, social programs, etc., things that defense, etc., things that the government spends money on. So the income coming in minus the expenses going out gives us our net flow, right? For our national economy, our income must always equal our expenditures, or our income should be greater than our expenditures. Should be that way. Otherwise, we run what's called a deficit, which is what our country has been running for the past 23 years. 23 years, yeah. So the United States has been running what we call a deficit. What does that mean? It means that we're spending more money than we are taking in. In most cases, that's a really bad thing. Okay, like if you think about your household, if you're spending more than you got coming in, you're in trouble, right? You're in debt, and you're going to keep going further into debt. That's bad. Debt is a bad thing. Okay, debt is a really bad thing. The further you go into debt, the harder it is to get out. Okay, so the same can be said for the national economy, right? The further we go into debt from the national economy perspective, the harder it's going to be to come out of this. And you might hear economists, especially today's day and age, you might hear economists talking about what they call the fiscal cliff. That's a term, right? Fiscal cliff. Basically, what that means is people are worried that we keep going further into debt because the government's spending more than we've taken in. We're getting further into debt. Soon we ain't going to be able to pay for things, right? Because we're not going to have enough coming in. We got too much going out, not enough coming in. That's a problem. So what that means is in a few years from now, hopefully not, but Congress needs to do something about this. In a few years from now, we're not going to be able to fund Social Security. We're not going to be able to fund Medicare. We're not going to be able to fund Medicaid. We're not going to be able to fund national defense. These are huge, huge issues. So the government needs to figure their act out, because right now, this has been happening for the past 23 years. They've been spending more than they've been taking in. So they got to learn to balance their books and actually make a real budget that's longer than a few months. Because y'all just heard what happened on the news just last week, is that the government decided to kick the can even further down the road for another few months because they can't figure out how to set a budget, right? So that's a big problem. And they've been doing that for years now. And it's kind of embarrassing, to say the least. So your income must equal your expenses, or your income should be greater than your expenses, and to be effective in running a government. I want you to think about your household. I want you to think about the company you work for or might work for in the future. And I want you to think about goods and services that you purchase and all those things. Just think about it now. So think about how the two interact with each other. At your house, you receive income from your employer, which is a company or a firm. You use that income, you take the income you receive, and you spend it on goods and services. Well, you're going to spend it on rent. You're going to spend it on groceries. You're going to spend it on clothing. You're going to spend it on fuel. And then maybe if you got something left over, you might go get yourself something nice. But typically, most households, they spend their income to buy goods and services. Right? That's the way it normally works. That's the way it works at my house. I have a feeling that's the way it works at your house. So I had said that we take our income and we purchase goods and services. Who are we purchasing from? We're purchasing from the companies, right? The companies, and sometimes it's the companies we work for we're purchasing from. We're purchasing from the companies. Now, what do the companies do? The firms. Well, the firms, companies, they pay your wages. They also pay their rent. And then if there's anything left over, we call that profit. Revenue minus expenses equals net income. Revenue minus expenses equals gross profit. If there's any profit left over, goes to the owners. What do the owners do? They're going to spend money, right? But you see how this works. The households work for the firms. The households receive money from the firms, and then they spend that money on goods and services from the firms, purchasing from the firms. The firms pay the households, and then they also pay other expenses, right? And they get their money from the households, right? It's interrelated. So think about that. Now let me show you what it looks graphically. You see the outside part of this Venn diagram, circular flow diagram, whatever the hell this is called. I want you to think about this for a second. The household works for the firm. The firm pays the household wages, right? Firm pays the household wages. The household spends their wages on goods and services through the marketplaces, and that goes right back to the firms, you see? So that's that green line moving counterclockwise. The red line on the middle, it shows us this. The households work for the firms. So the household output is labor, land, and capital. Goes into the markets, and the markets go to the firms. See? The firms spend money on goods and services, and those goods and services are bought by the households. See how that works? It's all interrelated. Now we introduce gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is measured by revenue and expenses. If you break it down a little further, it's measured by things like income, revenue, and the expenses, wages, rent, profit, etc. So you can see how gross domestic product is measured based off of the activity from the households and the firms as they participate in the markets for goods and services and the factors of production. So what is gross domestic product? As I'd mentioned, it is how we measure the overall well-being of the national economy. So, gross domestic product is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country during a given period of time. We measure gross domestic product every quarter of every year. So we measure it, the 4 times a year to get an understanding of how well the country is performing throughout the year. So the given period of time is a quarter within a year. So 3 months out of a year. Now that we know what the period of time is, the country is the United States, and we're measuring the goods and services produced within the United States. That's how we measure gross domestic product. You can say that, and this is what some economists will say, is that gross domestic product is the market value. It's the market prices that reflect the value of those goods. So think about when you go into a store, we'll say a grocery store, for example. You go into the grocery store and first thing I usually do is I look at the prices, I'm like, oh, how much did it go up this week by, right? So I look at the prices. And if you think about the prices within that grocery store, it's reflective of the value of those goods, right? Of the groceries. So you can use a grocery store as an indicator of gross domestic product, right? So it's just a way of thinking about it. All items produced in the economy and sold legally within the marketplaces are the products that we look at in terms of pricing, right? This excludes illegal items, right? It's hard to measure those kind of products, right? It's not like somebody's reporting, So, and it also excludes items that are produced and consumed at home. What that means is some people, they have a garden, right? Like I don't have a garden. It'd be nice to have a garden. I've been thinking about doing it, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to water the plants and grow the plants. And, I just don't have it. I just don't have it in me. But some people have a home garden, right? They grow their own fruits and vegetables. I can't measure that. I can't measure when somebody grows their own fruits and vegetables at home.
Uh-oh, that's not nice, Chuck.
I know it's not. But I can't measure my own fruits and vegetables was grown at home. So I can't include that in gross domestic product, So I can't measure it. There's no way to measure that. So when we talk about measuring gross domestic product, remember it's all the legal goods and services that are produced within the United States during an economic period like a quarter. Okay? And the market prices reflect the value of all those goods and services that are legally produced. We do not include illegal products, and we do not include products that are produced and consumed in the home environment because we can't track that data. Okay. We look at the value of the intermediate goods that are already included in the prices of the final goods. Here's what that simply means. To create a product, it requires direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. If you've had me for Principles of Accounting 2, you will know what that means. But I'll explain it for you, those of you who have not yet had me for Principles of Accounting 2. Direct materials are the materials that go into manufacturing a product. Think about, let's say, this calculator, for example. I have a calculator here in my hand. This calculator, okay, this calculator is a BI-82 Plus. It is primarily composed of plastic, some rubber, and some component materials. Okay, plastic, rubber, and component materials are the direct materials that make up the majority of the cost of making this product. Those would be what we call intermediate goods. They're already included in the final cost of making this product. Okay, the other cost that goes into making this product is direct labor. Those are the people making the calculator. Okay. And then we have the factory overhead. Those are the other things that we don't directly trace to the product. It'd be things like the factory rent, the supervisor's salary, indirect materials, etc. So direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead go into the cost of making a single product, like a calculator, for example. Those three different components we call intermediate goods. And together they make the final cost of a product. And that final cost of the product is the value of that product that we measure in gross domestic product. And of course, we also measure other goods and services that are both tangible and intangible. Tangible means you can physically touch it. That's what the word tangibility means. You can physically touch it. If it is tangible, that means I can physically hold it in my hand. For example, this calculator is tangible. I have it in my hand. Intangible goods and services are things that we cannot physically touch. For example, a trademark. I can't physically touch a trademark. A patent. I can't physically touch someone's idea. A patent is an idea. I cannot physically touch music, right? Those are things that I cannot physically touch. That word is intangible. So tangible goods and intangible services are things that we also include in the final measurement of gross domestic product. And of course, we only measure goods and services that are currently being produced within that time frame, the 3 months that we measure gross domestic product. Within the country means within the borders of that country. Okay, goods and services produced domestically. So goods and services that are produced only within the borders of the United States, regardless of the nationality of the producer, or in most cases, the origins of the components. Here's what I mean by that. This calculator was not entirely produced here in the United States. It was assembled here. It was assembled here. According to the back of this, a lot of the parts came from the Philippines. Okay, the Philippines probably produced a lot of the components that go into this calculator. The calculator itself was assembled here in the United States. Therefore, because it was assembled here in the United States, it is included in gross domestic product. Just because components are produced in other countries, as long as the final assembly occurs here in the United States, it counts toward our gross domestic product. So it's regardless of the nationality of the producer. And we only measure in a certain period of time, usually quarters and a full year. Every year has 4 quarters, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. A quarter represents 3 months, 3 consecutive months. January, February, March is Q1. April, May, June is Q2. July, August, September is Q3. October, November, December is Q4. I look at all 4 quarters to equal a year. So in gross domestic product, we look at it every single quarter, and then we look at it as a whole year after the 4 quarters goes by. Now there is a formula that you need to know in order to measure gross domestic product. The formula is not terribly complex, but it's important that you understand it. This helps us to measure the entirety of the gross domestic product. So the formula reads like this: Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Okay, yeah, I know, it sounds like, what do you call, algebra. Kind of is, a little bit. Here's how it works. Y represents the entire gross domestic product. So we're trying to solve for Y. Right? So how do we solve for Y? We take consumption, which is the consumption of goods and services, the use of goods and services, plus investment. Investment comes from the investment of both companies and country. Okay? Companies and country. Investment is when a company directly invests in itself in order to grow. Usually, to grow a company, we look at purchasing property, plant, and equipment. When a company purchases property, plant, or equipment, the intention is it's investing in itself to grow the business, right? So that's the type of investment that we look at in gross domestic product. It could also be foreign investment as well. Foreign investment is where another country invests in the United States for their purposes, which is usually to create a company within the U.S. Okay, or maybe they already have a company in the United States and they're investing in that company. Yeah, very common. So foreign and direct investment is I. G is government purchases. As you know, the government purchases things to operate. We purchase all of our things that we need for infrastructure. The government builds roads, schools, bridges, police and fire, and military, etc. They need to purchase things for those programs, right? Purchasing heavy equipment, etc., etc. There's a lot of things, right? A lot of things government purchases. So government purchases is G. And then the last part of the equation is net exports. Net exports. Remember, exporting is when we, the United States, are selling our goods and services to other countries. We're exporting them. We're sending them away. We made the product here in the United States. We're exporting it to another country. Think about one of the earlier examples I gave between the United States and Japan. The United States exports a lot of wheat that is grown here in the middle of the country. Why? Because the U.S. is really good at producing wheat. And so we provide our additional wheat to other countries by selling it to those countries, okay, or exporting it. So the whole equation together is gross domestic product equals consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. Okay, we're usually always trying to solve for Y, gross domestic product. So breaking it down a little bit further, consumption, as I had mentioned, is the use of goods and services. It's the consumption. It's represented by the spending of households on goods and services, the consumption of goods and services. Goods are durable goods and non-durable goods, or durable. Durable meaning long-lasting. Durable means long-lasting. This would be things like furniture, electronics, clothing, vehicles. These are durable things. They're hard. That's what durable means. Non-durable would be things like perishable goods, like groceries, for example. Those are perishable goods, meaning they expire at some point in the future. Perishable are non-durable goods. And then we have services that the household spent on. Intangible services and other things like spending on education. Intangible services are services that we cannot physically touch. I cannot physically touch a bank transaction over the internet. I cannot physically touch a haircut. I mean, you could, but you see what I'm saying? It's an intangible service. And then spending on education, of course, is a service. So consumption, spending by households on goods and services. The exception to this rule is the purchase of new housing. The exception to consumption is the purchase of new housing. Why? Because when it comes to housing, we don't include new housing as a part of gross domestic product measurement. The reason for that is because the house is said to have infinite number of use and infinite life, right? So the idea is that, like, for example, if you think about some of your houses might be over 100 years old, right? So it's like, it's going to be around a long time after when I'm here and after I'm gone. So we don't include that in gross domestic product. It's just because you're not consuming your house, right? The house is there for your use, and it'll be there for your use long after you're there. So that's why we don't include new housing. So consumption, spending by households on goods and services, except for the purchase of a new house. Breaking down investment, as I mentioned, businesses invest in themselves. How do they do that? They purchase property, plant, and equipment. Okay, from the residential side, landlord apartment building, a homeowner's personal residence, residential capital. These include improvements to the homes, okay? Improvements to homes. That's residential capital. So those are investments. When you hear the word investment, think property, plant, and equipment. I'm investing in property, plant, and equipment to grow my business in the future, to help my business produce more. You see? That's why I call it an investment. Government purchases is where the government spends on goods and services. This could be local, state, and federal governments. Think about the purchase of equipment to help to build roads, schools, bridges, etc. Right? Or equipment for the fire department, police department, for the military, etc. Yeah. The government purchases all those things. That's government purchases. The last part of the gross domestic product equation is net exports. Net exports is measured by taking your exports minus your imports. Exports minus your imports. Remember, exports is when we sell goods and services to other countries. We're exporting it out of the United States. We're sending it out. That's an export. An import is where we're bringing it into the country from another country. Import is where we're bringing it into the United States from somewhere else. For example, the United States is really good at producing wheat. We produce so much of it that we have a lot left over. What do we do with the leftover? We export it, sell it to other countries. We're not very good at producing electronics. Okay, we import a lot of electronics. Where do we import them from? Japan and other countries that are really good at producing electronics. We import those to the United States. So that's the example, right? So
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good example, I think. So exports minus imports equals net exports.
We used to be leaders of microchips and whatnot, because the Macintosh
Back in the
and
80s, we
PC
were
and a lot
awesome
of
at that.
things were innovated here.
Mm-hmm.
We had a supply surplus with a good amount of Asia through the 80s and the beginning of the 90s when it came to microchips.
That's right.
And semiconductors.
Semiconductors, yes, we were the world's leader in semiconductors in the 1960s through the early 1990s, and we lost that lead to a lot of Southeast Asia countries. And the reason for that is, one of the biggest reasons, of course, is the cost of labor, but one of the other reasons is it just simply became ineffective for us to be able to keep producing it locally. And but now the interesting thing with that, Len, is we kind of see a reversal happening, and it's for other reasons. It's not because our labor's cheap here in the United States, because we know that it's not. In fact, that our country, it's one of the highest in the world, but but it's because the reasons are national security, right? So we want to be able to control the supply chain is the real reason, because we've seen what happened during the pandemic of what happens with the supply chain, and in order for us to mitigate something like that, we're kind of reversing the order and starting to produce them here locally again. And so you see what's going on in Texas and in Nevada and in Arizona, that they're opening these really big, what they call gigafactories, to produce a lot of the semiconductors and microchips, and it's interesting. It's a real interesting thing that's going on now.
Yeah, my next little public policy piece is going to have to be around making some of these batteries and some of these semiconductors and microchips right here domestically, since we import a lot of labor ourselves is highly skilled and highly educated. That might be one of those ones we can invest in and change up the diagram flow.
Yeah, it's a difficult landscape. I love the idea because we're sitting on a lot of cobalt, which is one of the chemicals needed to produce batteries. But the trouble is, there's a lot of groups that are against mining for the obvious reasons, because it does some serious destruction to the natural environment, which it can be mitigated, but politically, it's not it's not very viable politically, but if you think about economically, it's very viable. It would be
Oh
very
yes.
beneficial for the
Oh
U.S.
yes. Oh yes.
But
On the political front, I've worked on so many elections since the late '90s as a volunteer and as a paid consultant and as a lobbyist and as I guess you could say the groundwork, the ground team going door to door, registering people to vote, doing ballot initiatives. And I tell you what, it seems like it's about the messaging, and
yeah,
that's why when we mentioned earlier that you could come up with a kind of a system where you could add up how much time and usage of roads and infrastructure. And once you do that and you can put it in a way where somebody can understand it, because it's hard.
that's
I've
right.
knocked on all kind of doors. It's hard when you got someone's attention to explain a complicated bill. The
Yeah,
best I can do most of the time is to tell them the bill number, tell them the congressman, and just tell them to call. This is what you lose.
it's difficult.
I think we once we change the way we present our economics to people that are laymen's, where you focus on what you gain and then put that with
Got it.
what you lose and then put what the opportunity cost is and what the institutional cost is right into uh, uh, the original package. Is the same thing for Social Security, um, uh, and a couple of the other institutional costs. You really have to put it on paper and then kind of like honestly, my way is to do like little short movies, YouTubes of them. So
Perfect. Yeah,
we'll see.
yeah.
I'm gonna see if it works out here in DC. I'm looking to pass a couple more laws here coming up here, and we just
That'd
did
be
the
awesome.
budget. So your class is so influential for me
Good. Yeah,
because
that's
of
good to
that.
hear. Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's and a lot of it has to do with the messaging. So that's why, like when I teach this course and my other courses, like Principles of Accounting 1 and 2, I try my absolute best to make everything as relatable and understandable to you for you to be able to digest it. Because if I just said, hey, go read the book, or here are the slides, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make it relatable. So if I can't make it relatable, it's difficult for other people to understand it. So if you message it correctly, make it relatable, um, it's a great way to sell it. So, good conversation.
Yes.
Love it.
I'm trying to tell you what I do when I talk to people real quick, and I've gotten a couple laws passed here. I tell you money over BS, and
That's right.
it will. If I can explain what the money is, like for instance, when I did the minimum wage here in DC, and I did ballot initiatives on that, and talked to the council members and to the business owners. The way my math works out is like this. I can show you what someone makes as a server at $2 an hour versus as a server at $10 an hour.
Yep.
And then I can show you the amount of tax that went up. Then I can show you the amount of places because they're more likely to get off or go in earlier than the conventional worker where they stop off at. And then how many people, because they're also cash flush,
Right.
how much cash they have on hand, the hidden economy. And when you add that up, and then you realize how much more taxes you get, and the business also can have a customer like Henry Ford. I live by the Henry Ford motto, where your employee can afford to buy a hotel room in your hotel or eat a meal in your restaurant. Anyways, I'm gonna stop interrupting. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting
Yeah,
class.
no, I appreciate the conversation. Thank you. So, and what Len and I were just talking about, this kind of leads us into an example of the calculation of gross domestic product. And this is a real example from 2015. So, about 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, the GDP of the United States was almost $18 trillion with a T. Okay, so that's Most people can't understand that kind of number because it's so big. So $18 trillion, and you think to yourself, okay, well, that's pretty good, right? Yeah, it's pretty good. So, but let's take a look and break this down. So, how we get to 55,822 per person in the United States, gross domestic product per person, which is a great number, by the way. Well, we got to remember, we got to solve for gross domestic product. How do we do that? We take consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports to equal gross domestic product. Back in 2015, the consumption was 38,218 per person, which was equivalent of 68% of GDP. So 38,218 is 68% of the 55,822. So consumption, 38,218 plus investment of 9,402 plus government purchases of 9,919 plus net exports. In this case, remember, net exports, we take exports minus imports. Exports minus imports. In this case, clearly during the year of 2015, our imports were greater than our exports. How do I know that? Because this number is negative. Okay. It says minus 1,657. So if I take those numbers, consumption 38,218 plus investment 9,402 plus government purchases 9,919 plus net exports of minus 1,657, I get to 55,822. So the question everyone usually asks me is this good? Is this good for GDP? And the answer is yeah, definitely. Why is it good? Well, number one, it's a positive number, so that's a good thing, right? So yeah, it's good overall. But that's how we get there. You see, consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports gets us to gross domestic product. We can further see that broken out, in a table format. So how do we figure out in a per person, right? Well, first we got to know what the population is. But we can simply add it all up to figure it out. So if GDP in this example is 20,501, I got a consumption of 13,952 plus investment of 3,652 plus purchases of 3,526 and net exports of minus 626. I get all those numbers together to equal the 20,501. That's in billions of dollars. So I take that total in billions of dollars and I divide that out by the number of citizens in the country during that time to get it into a per person in terms of actual dollars. So if I have, I forgot what the census was back then. I think we had about 8, I don't even know where we're at now, to be honest. I think it was like 20, I think back in 15, it was like 220 million US citizens or something like that. So, but you see the breakdown, you understand the breakdown. Why is it important to look at it in both total and per person? The reason why we break it down to a per person level is to show what the actual generation of wealth is on a per person basis to allocate gross domestic product. That's why we see it in a per person perspective. And we can also see the percent totals. Consumption is usually always the highest value, typically. We're a consumer nation. That's the United States. So we know how to measure gross domestic product. Okay, consumption plus investments, plus government spending, plus net exports. Great, we got that down. But now that we know that, we can also look at what we call the real gross domestic product versus what we call the nominal gross domestic product. And I'm going to explain this concept. So we'll look at total spending. And remember, total spending, we're looking at consumption from the households. Okay? So think about this. We'll look at it from year to year. We look at how the economy produces a larger output of goods and services from year to year. And goods and services are being sold at higher prices year to year. I'm making more products and services, but also the price of those products and services continue to rise. You might be wondering, well, how can that be? I made more of that product. Shouldn't the cost go down, not up? Right? No, it goes up. Why? Inflation is one reason. Another reason why the price goes up is we have more consumers. We're consuming more. We're producing more. We're also consuming more. And inflation's there. So that's why the price goes up along with the increase in goods and services. So we look at year to year. We compare the real gross domestic product to the nominal gross domestic product. The nominal gross domestic product looks at the production of those goods and services at their current prices. At their current prices, nominal. Production of goods and services at their current prices. So we compare the current prices to their values. The real. Real is value, nominal is current. So real gross domestic product, we look at production of goods and services valued at constant prices. Looking at the value, valued at constant prices. We designate year to year, and we're looking at the change over time. Yep. For the base year, we take where nominal GDP equals the real GDP. So let's take a look at an example of this comparison. So here we have some data. Here's 2019, 2020, 2021 of the price of hot dogs, for example. Price of hot dogs back in 2019 were $1 a piece. 2020, they're $2 a piece. 2021, they're $3 a piece. You can imagine where they are now, right? So we see the price of the hot dogs rise as time goes on. We also see the price of hamburgers going up as time goes on, from $2 back in 2019 to $3 in 2020 and to $4 in 2021. Related to that is the increase in the quantity. The price, remember, the quantity goes up, but so does the price. Why the price goes up? More consumption and also inflation. So let's take a look at how we would calculate and compare the nominal gross domestic product to the real gross domestic product. So looking at two different products, okay, and we're looking at the production of those from year to year, and we're comparing, okay. So the base year is 2019. Why the base year 2019? That's the oldest data. So here in 2019, my nominal GDP is $200. How 200? Price times quantity plus price times quantity gives me 200 for 2019. Year two, price times quantity plus price times quantity. Nominal GDP is 600. Follow that same process for year 3, 2021. I'm at 1200. Okay, interesting. Now let's calculate the real gross domestic product. Here's where you'll notice the difference. I take the base price times the quantity. Base price times the quantity for each year, for each product. The base is the oldest price. The base is the oldest price. So to calculate real gross domestic product, I take the oldest price times the quantity from that respective year. So for example, in 2019, it's going to be the same as it was in the nominal GDP. Price times quantity. So $200 for 2019. Now look at 2020. I keep the base price, $1 per hot dog, $2 per hamburger. Then multiply that by the quantity from 2020. I got $3.50. Okay, that's a big difference from $600, isn't it? Then 2021, base price times quantity. Base price times quantity gives me 500, 2021. Okay, now that's interesting, right? The reason why we calculate these differences between the nominal GDP and the real GDP, number one is also trying to figure out how quickly prices rise. How quickly prices rise. That's what we're doing. We can measure this difference to understand how quickly prices rise. So if the price didn't rise, how much would the GDP be? That's the real GDP. The nominal GDP includes the price increase, you see? So that's why we calculate the difference. We can also calculate what we call a gross domestic product deflator. The gross domestic product deflator is a ratio of the nominal gross domestic product to the real gross domestic product times 100. What this does is it measures the current level of prices relative to the level of prices in the base year. I'm trying to figure out what is the percentage it's rising by each year. What's the percentage of the price rise each year? That's GDP deflator. Okay. So here, 2019 is going to be 100% because obviously it's the same values. 2020, we're at 171%. So in 2020, what this tells us is that the prices rose by 71% over the previous year. In 2021, we see the value at 240% over 2019's numbers. See how that works? So it gives you an idea of how much the price is rising on particular goods and services over the course of the years, right? So yeah, it's big time. That's where they get this data from. That's how they get the data. So as I had mentioned, the GDP deflator is a ratio of the nominal GDP to real GDP times 100. 100 is the base year. In this example was 2019. Base year is usually the oldest year. It measures the current level of prices relative to the level of prices in the base year. It can be used to take inflation out of nominal GDP. In other words, we're taking inflation rates out to tell us the rise of the price, the real prices, right? Not including inflation. Inflation, as you know, is the economy's overall price level increases. Inflation rate is calculated by taking the percent change in some of the price index from one period to the next. The inflation rate typically, is about 2% a year. That's when it's normal. Inflation rate is normally about 2, maybe 3% a year. Okay, that's the normal rate of inflation. That's a healthy rate of inflation. Prices always go up, you know that. Prices don't go down. They fluctuate, sure, but over the long run, they always go up, right? Your rent always goes up, right? 2, 3% a year. Your cost of living always goes up 2, 3% a year. Okay, always. It always goes up. Prices of things like gasoline, they'll fluctuate up and down, yeah, sure. But if you look at it historically, it always goes up, you see? So that's inflation. The inflation rate in year 2 is equal to the gross domestic product deflator in year 2 minus the gross domestic deflator rate in year 1 divided by the gross domestic deflator rate in year 1 times 100. That will give us the rate of inflation. So what's the rate of inflation from this year compared to last? We take the GDP deflator from this year minus the one from last year divided by the one from last year times 100. That tells us the rate of inflation. That's how we calculate rate of inflation. So the thing with the gross domestic product is that we look at gross domestic product in the real term as it grows over time. Real growth rate averages about 3% per year since 1965. It's pretty accurate, It's obviously in recent years it's been a little funny for obvious reasons, but yeah, take that with a grain of salt. It's about 3% per year. Growth is not always steady. It goes up and it goes down. What happens when growth goes down? We call that a recession. Okay. Now, recessions are kind of a funny thing. They're not always the same. Okay. A recession could be short or it could be long. It depends on the situation, right? The last long recession we had was in 2009 until about 2012. What happened during that time is we had banks giving people loans that had no business getting loans. And that caused a situation in housing, and it caused a situation in other markets. And so it led to a worldwide recession for several years. Now, a recession is a decline over it has to be at least 2 consecutive quarters of falling GDP. Okay, I had mentioned that the steady growth rate is at 3%. If it starts going down from that 3%, it starts going down, goes down to 2.5%. Okay, that's not good. First quarter. Second quarter goes down another 0.25% or 0.5%. That's bad. That means we're in a recession at that time. If it keeps going down, that's real bad. Right? Eventually, it's got to go back up because, law of physics say what goes down must come up or what goes up must come down. So, real GDP declines, lower incomes happen from recession, rising unemployment. As a result of recession, companies have falling profits, and increased bankruptcies are things that are noticed with recessions. As I had mentioned, some recessions are a lot shorter than others. And in fact, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you probably do know, we experienced a recession, was it last year? I think it was last year. It's either last year or the year before. Past few years have been a blur, as you know. But I want you to think about this now. A recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining gross domestic product. So I'm pretty sure it was last year. Yeah, last year the first 2 quarters were really bad of the year. And so we had a recession. Did our government call it that? No. They try to make it look nicer than what it actually was. So technically it was called a recession when you have 2 consecutive quarters of loss or more. You notice that throughout history, we have had a series of recessions with 2 consecutive losses or more. 2009, that was the terrible one. It's actually a lot longer than what it looks like on this graph, but and if you look all the way back in history, obviously 1929 was the worst, right? So it's a period of loss, 2 consecutive quarters or more. That's a recession. But we've had them in the past. We're going to have more of them in the future. That's just life. That's how it works. Gross domestic product is the single best measure of the economy's well-being. Yeah, mostly it is. Economy's total income is measured by gross domestic product, as you know, so are all of our expenditures. Think about the formula. Consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Countries that have larger gross domestic products, the people in those countries have better health care, a good life, a good education system. Absolutely. GDP measures our ability to obtain many of the inputs into a worthwhile life. The wealthier you are, the better off you are. Typically, that's how it works. GDP. But it ain't perfect. Okay? GDP is not a perfect measure. It's a really good measure, but it's not perfect. Why is it not perfect? It does not include things like taking vacation, value of other activities that take place outside of the United States, the quality of the environment, distribution of income, etc. Therefore, it's not quite perfect. It's a very good measure, though. And it's safe to say that countries with a higher gross domestic product per person, that people have higher life expectancy, higher literacy rates, and higher internet usage. In countries with lower gross domestic product rates, the opposite is true. Also, with lower gross domestic products rates in other countries, we see evidence of higher infant mortality rates. Other mortality rates are higher. Malnutrition is higher. Limited access to safe drinking water. Few school-age children actually in school. Low literacy rates, etc. So, yeah, I mean, you get my point. Countries with higher gross domestic product rates tend to have a better society where the people are better taken care of, like we benefit from here in the United States. And also in Europe, most of Europe has great GDPs. So most of the developed world is doing pretty well in terms of gross domestic product. The developing countries, while their current gross domestic product rates may not be the best, they are improving over time. I think about like South America and a lot of the countries in South America and Central America, that their GDPs, while they're not the best, they're getting really good, they're getting better. And so as they get better, we see that they'll take better care of their people, ultimately. So that's my 2 cents on that. Are there any comments, questions, concerns about anything we talked about today as it relates to gross domestic product? I think we did an all right job, right? Y'all still awake?
I'm still here.
All right, that's what I like to hear, Allison. I know you're still there. All right, thank you, kid, for the thumbs up. All right. You're all still there. That's good. All right, cool. All right. So, just to kind of recap a couple of things, and I'll let you go. Here we are in week 7. What's going on this week? We have a discussion board for this week as it relates to gross domestic product. Thank you for the thumbs up, Rashema. Appreciate that. And Rashema, thank you for getting us started. Appreciate that as well. So Rashema and Boo, thank you both so much. Thank you so much for kicking us off with the discussion boards. So, wonderful job here. Yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. We can see some grateful paragraphs responding to the questions. So as it states here, yeah, I'm looking for you to answer 4 questions. As you can see, there's 8 questions here. Select 4 of them. Select 4 of your favorite ones, okay, and answer those questions. Just like Rashema did here. Thank you, Rashema, again. Very well done. Full paragraphs. Looks great. Perfect. Okay, and then make sure to respond to 2 of your classmates. And then once that's done, you'll earn the full credit for the discussion board. And then the other thing you have to do this week is a quiz related to gross domestic product. Do those 2 things for me, please, please, please. Use the time on Wednesday to do that. That's why the time is there for you. If you are late with your current work or work that has already passed, please get that done. Please. Remember what I told you. The only way you can pass this class is to do all the work. So please go back and complete work that you missed. I want to see you do well. The only way we can do well in this course is to do all the work. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm not going to penalize you. I just want you to get it done. The other reason for that is because the midterm's coming up, right? Midterms next week. So we'll talk more about that next week, but it's coming very quickly. So please, let's get it done. Comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Thank you all so very much for your time today. Appreciate all of you. If you ever need anything, you can email me, call me, or set up office hours. I'm still here for you. All right? Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.